Welcome to this tutorial for the Global 6000 business jet for MSFS. This tutorial is from a runway start with engines on, and we've planned our flight in the MSFS world map. A tutorial for how to do this is linked in the description below. Bear in mind this plane does not have the same flight model or systems as the real aircraft, but you do get a really nice exterior model and a virtual cockpit with the Garmin G3000 suite, and it also works with a working title G3000. Okay, let's jump inside and fly. So the first time you fly this plane, if you're using the working title G3000, you'll need to switch on the synthetic vision. The plane will remember this setting, so you don't have to do it every time you fly. With that done, as always, we will press our barometric pressure hotkey, which is B by default, to set the altimeter to local pressure. We'll now return to the MFDs and head to the radios page. We'll click through to the audio and radios page and click our nav1 frequency. We will set this to the frequency of our destination ILS and hit transfer to make it the active frequency. I find ILS frequencies on the website apxp.info, but you can find these in many different places. We'll now head up to the MCP and activate nav mode so the aircraft will follow our flight plan. We'll also dial in our desired cruising altitude. This is a fairly short flight, so about 26,000 feet, but this jet can reach about 50,000. If the flight director isn't already active, hit the FD button on the MCP to activate it. You can also activate the yaw damper at this point. Heading back down to the MFDs, one cool thing about this plane is that it has non-coupled VNAV. So if we go to flight plan, scroll to the waypoint we want to use as our top of descent, we'll click that waypoint and tell the aircraft we want to pass that waypoint at our cruising altitude. And we'll then scroll down to the waypoint we want to act as our bottom of descent. In this case, it's the intercept waypoint for the ILS. We'll set our bottom of descent altitude of 2,000 feet above ground level, and you can see the G3000 has planned a descent path. We'll click through to the VNAV page, hit VNAV enabled, and during flight this page will give you a countdown to your top of descent. On the MFD homepage you'll find a speed bugs button. If you press all on, various important speeds will be displayed on the PFD during your flight, such as V1 rotate speed and approach speed. The values calculated by this plane are not really accurate. You want to add 30 to 40 knots to each speed displayed. It's now time to fly. So parking brake off, throttles fully forward. Start to rotate at about 30 knots above the displayed rotate speed, and when you have a positive rate of climb, bring the landing gear up. You can also roll off the flaps to 0. On the MCP, hit the flight level change button, followed by Autopilot. The aircraft will now follow your flight plan and start to climb to your cruising altitude. The button to set standard barometric pressure doesn't work, so as you pass through transition altitude, just adjust the barometric pressure using the control on the MCP. As you reach top of climb, the aircraft will start to level off. Once you're level, you want to set your throttles to the cruise position as shown here. We can now start preparing for our descent. So on the MCP, dial in your bottom of descent altitude. That's 2,000 feet for us. On the PFD homepage, we can dial in some minimums for our approach. And now relax and enjoy the flight until our top of descent. Keep an eye on the VNAV countdown, which can be found on the VNAV section of the flight plan page on your MFD. Once the timer reaches 0, put the aircraft in flight level change mode and bring the throttles back to idle. The plane will now pitch down and begin its descent. You can monitor the descent on the MFD. At first you might find quite a big vertical deviation. You can correct for this by slowing the aircraft down. This is done by applying spoilers. Adjust the spoilers during descent to keep on your desired descent profile. You want to keep the vertical deviation as low as you possibly can to make sure you hit your plan's bottom of descent. As you get closer to your destination, you might find it helpful to zoom in the map. The control for this can be found on the MFDs by the pedestal. As you pass through transition altitude, hit B to adjust your altimeter to the correct barometric pressure. As you reach bottom of descent, you want to idle the throttle to slow the aircraft down to your approach speed. You'll want your actual approach speed to be 30 or 40 knots above the approach speed displayed on the speed bugs page. When you reach this approach speed, you want to configure the aircraft to full flaps with landing gear down. Also put the throttles in cruise position to maintain this speed. As you get to the intercept waypoint, the aircraft will automatically switch nav source and go into localizer follow mode. You want to hit approach at this point to arm the glide slope. When the plane starts to descend on the glide slope, you want to adjust your throttles to a position that allows you to maintain your approach speed. In this aircraft, I set the throttles to just above idle. You should now be in a fairly stable descent. If for some reason your plane does not intercept the localizer correctly, you can use the nav source button on the PFD to cycle through your nav sources until localizer is selected. It's almost time for our landing, so at about 200 feet above the ground, I disengage the autopilot and fly the approach manually. As we pass the runway threshold, I'll idle the throttles and the plane will naturally descend. A small flare just before touchdown should see us safely on the tarmac. This plane does have reverse thrust, but you don't really need to use it, you can just idle the throttles and apply the brakes. And that's a successful flight in the Bombardier Global 6000 for MSFS. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you found this useful. If you did, please drop a like and feel free to subscribe as I make this kind of content fairly regularly. Take care and I'll see you next time.